The IMF and your World Economic Outlook, everyone here has read it 3 times just to understand exactly what the dynamic is. You've downgraded your forecast, but there's also a scenario where the world economy skims recession. How likely is that?
Depends on the longevity of the war in the Middle East and the scale of infrastructure destruction that happens in the countries over there. And that is the big unknown. We now have ceasefire. I pray it turns into a durable peace, and in that case, we can see a somewhat faster recovery. But the uncertainty has been profound, and we all need to learn to operate in an environment of high and permanent uncertainty.
But MD, even if there's a ceasefire that stays, okay, and there's some kind of diplomatic resolution, is the market discounting the real impact on the price of oil and therefore inflation?
Well, let me just say that even if the war ends tomorrow, it would take quite some time for the recovery to kick in. Not only because of the infrastructure destruction. Tankers are slow-moving vessels. A tanker that leaves today would take 40 days to reach the Pacific Islands. So we have to keep in mind that the impact is already baked in. Why are markets so optimistic? I think part of the reason is because there is a high concentration of financial assets in the United States. The US economy is doing well. It is relatively not so impacted because the US is an oil exporter, not importer. And that creates that picture of dynamism and vibrancy, but I can tell you that's not the story of the rest of the world. In the rest of the world, already there is a lot of pain.
So, I mean, does that mean that the market is mispricing, that all this market exuberance is actually misplaced?
What it means is that markets are geared by events in the largest economy that are really positive. The United States is the only large economy that has high productivity growth, and markets are seeing that. Technology optimism is here. Markets are rushing on it. But should there be more caution? I would argue yes, because what we are seeing in terms of supply chain disruptions is already quite significant. And with every day that passes, that tanker is not leaving for a destination, and that delays the rebounds of the world economy.
How much do you worry about governments trying to over-adjust if inflation expectations goes up? And actually, how much of a mess would this be? I mean,
it's such an important question. So look at what is happening. Short-term inflation expectations have moved up. Not by much, though. We have increased our inflation projection from 3.8% to 4.2%. It is up, but not dramatically. And very important, long-term inflation expectations don't budge. They're well anchored. May they stay this way. So it is very important that central banks act carefully. Those that are in a good position of credibility, they can take wait-and-see attitude. They also have to signal, we are prepared to act if it is necessary, but please don't rush. My worry is because of 22, now central banks may say, let's move faster, and that could be very dangerous because it would suffocate growth.
I mean, we're looking back at every IMF, World Bank meetings. Since 2020, there's been something. 2020 was COVID. 2022, of course, it was the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Then you had tariffs.
Inflation,
I mean, it's
tariffs.
shock after shock.
So it looks like a layered cake. Shock upon shock upon shock, except it is not at all tasty. I can tell you that everybody has to absorb reality, and reality is we are in a more shock-prone world. Shocks will continue to come. What does it mean? For fiscal authorities, build buffers. When you are in good time, don't waste your resources. For monetary policy, calibrate policy carefully. Be prepared to act if and when necessary. And everywhere, countries have to be much more alert to the high uncertainty within which we operate. Agility, adaptability, this is what we have to do.
MD, how worried are you about the UK? This was one of the countries that was downgraded the most.
I mean, they are downgraded, but also we see in the UK very mature approach to policy. The UK is very careful not to go into indiscriminate spending, and Bank of England is very clear around the approach they're going to take, the right approach to this situation. Actually, we see the UK in terms of fiscal response as a good example for others, because many other countries are rushing to throw money they don't have out of the good intention to help people. It has to be targeted, it has to be temporary, and it has to be done within the fiscal boundaries of countries, and the UK is doing that. UK is also a country where there is a recognition that your best defense is growth. Pro-growth policies are going to be your buffer for the future.
Yeah, not easy, but certainly
Absolutely
the government is aware of it.
Not easy, not easy.
I also wanted to ask you about, look, the US, there's, again, President Trump is going after Jay Powell, saying, look, he'll fire him, he doesn't step down from the Fed. I mean, we go back to this idea of central bank independence. How problematic is it, especially in a time where actually central banks have a very, very difficult job at hand?
We have decades of evidence that independent central banks are an economic asset. They serve well when they have the opportunity to make decisions and the space to make decisions responsibly. And I can tell you one very interesting fact. Central banks in emerging market economies outperform their advanced economy peers. They have built that independence and strength of data-dependent policy making.
Again, market seems to look through a lot of these concerns. Does that worry you, that the function of almost keeping things in check is working differently?
On one level, it is good that the economy functions, because getting into panic is not going to help. So good functioning of markets is helping. Having that, we have seen tightening of financial conditions by some, but not by much. We have seen currency depreciation of some emerging markets, again, not dramatically. As long as we have a trajectory for the war to end and for economic activity to restart, we are in a very good place. But if we have prolonged period of time, it will be hard to keep optimistic.
MD, I also wanted to ask you a little bit about some, new countries or old countries that, are trying to access some of your programs. I wanted to start with Venezuela. So is the IMF ready to recognize the acting president to start negotiations?
At this point, Venezuela does not have recognition by majority of members. This being said, we are prepared to engage. Actually, at a junior technical level, we have been approached in good faith by the Venezuelan authorities. They desperately need help because, as you know, the economy shrank from this to 1/3. They have a risk of hyperinflation knocking on the door. 8 million people are outside of the country. So once our membership decides, even when they decide to recognize, we are ready to go.
Soon?
It is a matter of membership. I can tell you one thing, that there is an understanding among the region, the neighbors of Venezuela, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Chile. They don't want a failed state. They want Venezuela engaging with the fund.